and welcome to the Creative Warrior channel where we fight for our creativity. This is a Creative Warrior chat where we talk to creatives out there fighting for their creativity. Today we are talking to Leah McNaughton Lederman. She has created sit down because this is going to take a minute. She's got a very long resume here. Created 2 volumes of Café Macabre, a collection of horror stories and art by women, and her own short story collection, a novel of shorts, The Woman No One Sees. Her creative nonfiction has been published in The River and South Review and Defenstration Mag, and her essay, My Bleeding Heart, was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. In 2022, Leah published Beautifully Broken, the Katy Hayes Story, and her current memoir project involves growing up with a combat veteran father. But besides all that, Leah is a social media volunteer for the Lafayette Writers Studio and assists with marketing for the Indiana Writers Center, where she also facilitates the monthly online CNF group. She is the fiction nonfiction editor for the online literary and arts journal of Rust and Glass, and she is the director of the Midwest Writers Workshop. Leah lives in the Indianapolis area with her husband and an assortment of children, cats, and dogs. So thank you so much for making time for us among all that. Hello.
Well, I forgot to mention the hermit crabs.
Oh,
There's also hermit crabs.
of course. I hear they can be cranky.
Mhm.
Well, welcome, Leah. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me here.
Yes. Talk about all things creativity in your life. So to start, we'll get into all your projects and talk about all the things, the awesome things we mentioned in your intro. But tell us a little bit about your origin story. How did you get into writing? What made you want to start? What led you kind of down the path that you're on now?
All right. I feel like I've asked you this question in interviews. And I remember that you, like many other writers I know, will say like, "Oh, I had this book that I wrote when I was like a little kid." And I was like, "Man, the only thing I remember writing as a little kid was this horrible poem about going to South Carolina, and I used the rhyme, I can hardly bear a lina." So, like, I I did not have a creative child gift. Um, my dad always says that I tried to write my autobiography when I was really young, and it was something like age 4, the poet. But I don't remember that, so I don't know if it counts. I feel I feel like I always had a sense that writing was a strong point. It came somewhat easily to me. I trained people in how to write letters at a medical office and was like, well, just do it. And I didn't realize it was actually a skill. And that's actually what prompted me to go to grad school. And I got a master's in English lit, but it was still like I didn't do an MFA. It was still like this idea, like these concentric circles, like, okay, well, I'm going to be a teacher of English. And then when I left teaching, I became an editor of writing. And then it was like, finally, I kind of just had to put my money where my mouth was and be like, right. Even when I did the Café Macabre, like I felt like my emphasis was still on editing in that process. Most of the stories are by other people. So I think it was finally I got to think about this. Yeah, I guess Café Macabre came out in 2018, and we did our premiere party on October 31st in Muncie, Indiana, and I went to the bar next door and got a beer to celebrate. And I said, "Yeah, I'm doing this opening for this book," and da da da. She goes, "Oh, are you a writer?" And I was like, "Oh, yes." It was the first time I'd ever answered yes to that question. And even then, I feel like I still had it on the back burner and was still focusing mostly on editing, frankly, because that made money. Um, but I started using the editing to pay for my writing endeavors, taking classes, workshops. 2019, I said, no, I'm a writer and I'm going to focus on writing. And once I made that dedication out loud, um, things changed immediately. Even, I had attended classes and workshops and things like that beforehand. But once I said, no, I'm going to focus on this, this is going to be what I'm after for myself, the flavor of the classes changed. I'm not sure exactly what the word is I'm looking for, but the way I approached them, like I would go to the teacher afterwards, I would introduce myself. It became a like the vocation, I think. It was like, okay, now I want to network with you. I want you to remember who I am. I'm not just someone here writing for myself. I'm here because I want to become an author and I want people to know me as a writer. Once I did that and had that attitude shift, and priority shift, it opened many doors for me, is what I can say. So I would say that's my origin story, kind of going in circles and circles until I finally said, just do it. And I still don't get all my writing done. There's still like some concentric circling, but it feels good. I feel like I have really encapsulated myself in the world of writing at this point.
That's awesome. I love so much of what you said there too, but specifically, I think the mindset change. Not enough writers really embrace that. And there's a lot of hemming and hawing, like even when you've been doing it for so long, especially if you work another job. Even today, I'm like, oh, well, when people are like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, well, full time I work here.
Right.
But
Right.
so
Yes, yes, like because it's such a declaration. And so it's a weird practice to say because you don't have to say it when you're at a writers conference, but then when you're out in the wild, what do you do? I'm a writer and I also so I've started to do that. I've started to say I'm a writer and I also work for. So
mm,
that has been the kind of a change also. And it can be kind of not embarrassing, but like because of course then what have you published? And it's like, well,
mm,
yeah, so it gets tricky, but right, how we identify ourselves and how it affects how we behave, right?
it really does. Yeah. We make it almost feel like a luxury that we get to say like we're a writer or something like that, but it really just needs to be a matter
Job.
of the job, the
Like this
business.
is it. It's
Yeah.
part of my identity. Yeah.
Yes, because it always is, and it always has been. It sounds like even, you write a lot of nonfiction. It sounds like that's kind of been a calling almost for a long time. You've always had kind of that urge to tell truth,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah, right. I did journal forever. I forgot to mention that. I journaled, oh my gosh.
Mm,
I recently went through them and I really think, especially from like age 12 to 16, it really was very nearly every single day. And then it, hopped off and here and there. And now I'm back to a pretty regular practice again. But yeah, I can say that I've journaled since started when I was 9, and then in earnest, I started when I was 11. So I've been journaling for
yeah,
what is it, almost 30 years.
I can do that. Yeah, tell us about well, I was going to say tell us about some of your current projects, but I also kind of want to dig into Café Macabre and kind of what that is and where the inspiration from that even came from. I know that's not super current, but maybe let's start there and kind of.
Oh, in fact, hang on.
Oh.
I should have had this already. So, oh, thank you. Can you just take it for me? Okay. This is the cover of the first one, Café Macabre, by your dear one, Kaylin Smith. And then this is the second one, Café Macabre 2 by Emily Zelasco. So these happened because I was editing and I don't usually do much with horror. Sorry, it's my daughter. I don't do much with horror, but yeah, I'm terrified to like do laundry in the basement after dark, sometimes during the day. But these several horror authors were all writing, and I was going through their stuff. I was struck by the way that the women wrote about it differently. They were also different to interact with as clients. And then I was just terrified because all these different horror stories were going on in my head. And I thought, wow, what a ruckus is in there. And wouldn't it be cool if I just got these guys all together? So it was kind of like I've said before, like it's a crime of opportunity. I just had some people that I knew would be down to try it. And then I liked the idea of doing not just horror authors because I wasn't one. I wanted to like someone I knew was a writer. Hey, will you write me one? And she didn't usually do it. Someone I knew who was a poet, Michelle Joy Gallagher Soph. And there were others. So we're just creative people or just really smart people I knew. So it was just this real hodgepodge. I wanted to see what would happen. And I think something really amazing happened because it was just women talking about things they were afraid of. And it really struck me, the themes that came out. Um, and you were the reason for the second one. So yeah, in case people don't know, the first one hadn't even gone to Kickstarter yet. Um, and I met Allison at the Fantasticon in Toledo, Ohio, and she was like, "Hey, are you gonna do another one?" And I was like,
Because I missed it. I was like, I want my chance.
No, I was so stressed out about the first one happening, and I was like, oh, I don't know, what's going on. Oh, she's screaming. Um, sorry.
I didn't hear it.
Okay, good, because there's a screaming child. They only scream when I'm doing this. Anyway, yeah, you were the first one. And we're like, oh, are you gonna do another one? And I was like, oh my God, no way. And then another gal that I really admire, Lilan Musselman, asked me the same thing. And I was like, well, maybe. And the second time went through so much more easily because I knew what to do and I wasn't pregnant for most of it. That helped. So yeah, the first one was actually picked up by SourcePoint Press, and I decided, they were not really a prose publisher. So for the second one around, it was like, guys, yeah, this you're doing comics and movies, and I got this. So I put this one out on my own. But these books were kind of like a beard for my own writing because I was like, well, if everyone else is putting in a story, I guess I can put one in there. And of course, then I put like 3 in, but I needed to pad it too. So that was kind of a start to kind of just feel my way and see like, can I do this? Can I fit in with this group of women? And I felt like it actually was a pretty coherent mess of stories. Uh, both ones. You know what I mean? And then and that's where Novel of Shorts came from then, because this character Esther kept showing up in my work. And also it was 2020 and I was going to table at a con and I didn't want to just have one book. So I was like, well, I got a couple stories written. And so I kind of pounded out, you have all those ideas floating around. And then sometimes when you put your money where your mouth is, you can write those stories down in a short-ish amount of time. So I got this one put together pretty quickly. I said, okay, Esther, you can have your own darn book. And got this one done. And this one really is kind of near and dear to my heart because the first short story I ever really wrote and then got published was the first story in this collection. And yes, it's about a deranged cleaning woman who collects dust. So yeah, I don't even remember what your question was. You were asking me about Café Macabre.
and your current projects and all your projects.
Yeah. I mean, that was fiction. And I still like fiction and I plan to write more of it. I have at least one idea in mind, and a few short story ideas, but my focus has really been on creative nonfiction. I started working on, actually before I started either Café Macabre. I started this one when my 8-year-old was a baby. My cousin, Katy Hayes, is a quadruple amputee. She got a strep A infection after the birth of her 3rd child, and that's supposed to kill you. Like 98% of the people who get it die. She did not. She, goodness knows what it was. It was her fight. It was her husband's fight. It was, I don't know what it was, but they had to remove all 4 of her limbs and a lot of her insides to cut out the infection. And so then, I mean, obviously that's a traumatic incident to say the least in and of itself, but then how do you go back to your life? How do you function in a society that is not necessarily open or understanding to that? I shouldn't say open, of course, anyway, but you know what I mean, just it's a difficult thing. It's hard. You can't help yourself. You can't do the things that you want to do, or, scratch your nose or brush your baby daughter's hair. So there was a lot of really deep mourning. But then, she figures out how to paint. She can get an ace bandage, wrap it around there, and get a paintbrush in there. Oh, I should get all her paintings, because I have a million of those, and they're really incredible. So this is beautifully broken. Took 8 years, as my cousin reminds me often. Thanks, Katie. But it felt really good to get that out there also. And that was my first. I think I had 2 short nonfiction pieces published, but that was the first book length thing, a memoir, which is what the direction I really wanted to head in and continue. That's my real focus, is creative nonfiction, and I see that being very much long term, because I have many things I want to say.
So talk a little bit about that shift, that maybe we all know the difference between, fiction and nonfiction. Well, if we don't, I guess.
Yeah, sure, I can.
But talk about, I guess, what does it take kind of mentally to make that shift to writing completely fictional things, horror stories, which, may or may not be completely fictional. You never know. There's always a little piece of
Right. So it's like there really is sometimes kind of a watery difference, because creative nonfiction, just to lay the land here, I guess, is it's a true story that's told using the conventions of fiction. So it's going to use scenes and characters, except those scenes are your memories. The characters are people in your life, but there's going to be dialogue, description, things like that. So you're making it's not a biography or an autobiography that's just the facts. It's relying much more on larger truths and themes and things like this. So that's creative nonfiction. But yes, a lot of fiction contains huge elements of the author's life in it. In all of my horror stories, there's a lot about the house that I lived in, because there was a weird kind of thing that went on there. And I think 2 or 3 stories I wrote had, things specific about the house, but then there were other, people in my life that were in those stories. So what do you say? What is the difference there? It's like, this is based on a character in my life, but I'm not telling the true story. I'm using them in a completely different element. In creative nonfiction, you can't just make someone up.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to do that. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't a far leap necessarily. The difference, I guess, is in fiction, you can just say, well, what if this happened? And you don't have that leisure, I guess, if that's the word. You don't have that freedom in creative nonfiction. In creative nonfiction, even though you might not remember everything, even though maybe you're not even telling it your memory, who knows what really actually happened, you're always the fundamental aspect of it is truth seeking. You are trying to get to the truth in whatever way you can. And fiction, of course, is, I don't know, going for truths in a different way. I'm saying the same thing, right?
Which kind of leads to our point, right?
There's a watery difference, but I really would just say that creative nonfiction it's based concretely in your memories. You're really saying, this is what happened. Here's a scene from my childhood.
What is it kind of mentally or emotionally, kind of, to sit down and write the nonfiction versus the fiction? Is the process any different? Obviously there's going to be different mental states that you kind of have to sift through and think about. Have you met any challenges kind of making that shift, or how's that process been for you?
That's a really good question, especially because I feel like it's been a much longer time since I've written fiction. But I'm trying to think. I can remember with writing fiction, where I'm sitting, what story I'm working on, trying to come up with names, and then just trying to plot it out a little bit. Like, okay, well, what if she comes here and does this? And then it would make sense that this happens later. So there's a bit more of the choreographic aspect. And it's up to you. you can do whatever you want. So there's a much greater freedom, but that can be so sometimes freedom is not great. It's not freeing. But yeah, I guess and I'm not an outliner necessarily. But at least in creative nonfiction, like you've got a framework because I
Yeah.
know I'm going to tell this memory and maybe I'm going to do it out of order, but the same elements are more or less going to be in there. Whereas with fiction, you might discover something halfway through and be like, wow, what if I put in a whole new character? And you don't, you can't do that. So that was fun. I liked to you make discoveries when you're writing fiction, but sometimes in fiction you just come up with a new idea and you're like, oh, and that ties in perfectly with
Mhm.
this other thing. And it's like really exciting. I love those moments. And your characters kind of start defining themselves a little bit. In creative nonfiction, you're writing about, your dad or your sister. It's them. You can't really change that. That's
Mhm.
not fair to them. It's misrepresenting. Whereas in fiction, you know, come
Mhm.
up with whoever you want, make them do whatever you want. So it's kind of fun that way. Whereas in creative nonfiction and working on, this memoir, some of it is just very sweet. Like, oh man, you remember when you used to do this and just painting this cute picture of a little girl and her dad. And other things are very hard. You have to really get into a mind frame of like, okay, I'm gonna dig into some ugly things here. So how am I gonna be on the other side of this? And it really, really can bring you down. It can lift you up.
Mhm.
Hey, happy, this was sweet, but then other times it just brings you into a place you didn't necessarily want to. Um, However, you think, well, I want to do that. And that's because, of course, I feel like I need to say it's true of fiction, but really, much more so in my experience, in creative nonfiction, you're writing to discover the truth behind your memories. So, there's that little memory that you can't quite, that you always remember, but you can't quite figure out why. Why was it significant? Why do I remember it? And you start writing about it, and then you're like, oh, now I know why. This was the absolute first time I ever heard or understood my dad was in this war where people he knew died. Like that was, and I was 6 years old, and I'd always had this memory and never of it. And once I wrote about it, it was like, okay. And so there was some clarity there. And you're writing to discover. And so I learned a great many things about my family in doing research and in their perspectives about my dad and our family. I learned in writing to discover there were things inside of me, things I hadn't dealt with yet, that I was able to parse out on the page. Because I think with writers, I don't always hold with the whole every writer is an introvert kind of thing, but I definitely think that we are a very introspective
Mhm.
breed. And so, we're always processing and we're using writing and words to do so. Um, and writing creative nonfiction has changed me fundamentally. I already lived this life and have these memories, but now that I've gone through them and really started unwinding, it's not like untying a yarn. It's like you're getting into the thread count and like pulling apart the sheets string by string is how it feels because, this was me. This is the fabric that is me. And now I'm trying to find the teeniest, tiniest fibers of that. And in doing so, I have altered the way I'm made up. So that's why I love it. That's why I'm not done, is because I'm like, well, I need to know about this. And I need to think of this a little bit. So yeah,
Oh,
there
I
you go.
love that. That's awesome. And you do, I mean, you do so much. You sounds like so you teach creative nonfiction a little bit in your workshops. You lead creative
I
nonfiction.
leave because I've never taught creative nonfiction. I always want to be clear. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually,
But you
when I
taught.
well, yeah, yeah. I've taught an editing class. When I left teaching was when my second kid was born, and I was like, this is not paying the bills. It's actually like costing me money to teach because daycare and gas. So that's when I switched to editing. But I said to myself then, well, maybe you can come back to it teaching like those workshops you like to go to. And so, because I was so heartbroken, I only ever wanted to teach. So I did that. And then I did. It took 8 years, but just this past July, I taught my very first class in person. I'd done a few virtual, but this was my first one in person. I was back and it felt really good. So I am hoping to do more of that. And maybe eventually I'll feel qualified to teach creative nonfiction. But for now, I'll let the MFAs and people with multiple memoirs, like, you can teach it. I'm just a practitioner at this point, is how I feel.
Well, you do all those things. You lead these
Yeah.
workshops, you write, you manage chaos, it seems like, kind of on a daily basis.
No, they're always like really well behaved until I am doing something. Like, I haven't heard them scream like that in weeks. Like, what? Okay. Anyway, excuse me. Go on.
But what everyone would probably like to know is, how do you balance all of these things? How do you parse out the time? What do you give priorities to when you have this project and this project and and because I
Yeah.
started with this, how do you, decide when to spend time managing your workshop versus working on your memoir, versus how do you kind of, what's your
Yeah.
process?
I don't have a good system or a good answer. If I had a good system, my life would probably be better. Like, I hate
Next
like you think
question.
someone who's like doing really well or doing a bunch of things, you're like, oh man, they've got, they have it all together. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like it doesn't make any sense. Like this, my notes, like, oh my gosh, how does that make sense to anyone? It just like, I just started like writing in paragraph form and then it went back to bullets. Like, so
Hey.
yes. So like I have a list of things that need done and I will like write to myself, this needs to be done today. This needs to be done by the end of the week. So it's kind of like, that prioritizes a little bit. I have items that I literally just write back burner. Like, if you get to this in the next month to 6 months, you're good. Um, there are days of weeks. Like on Monday, I work for this organization and do everything I need to get done for them. So Monday is that day. Um, other things, I will do 20 minutes a day. If you just spend a little bit of time on this every day, then that's it. So it's like I got one thing here that's just all filled up, and I got one block of time that's all filled up, and then there's just all these little tasks. I really adhere to the if you can do it in 5 minutes or less, do it now. That's a big one. Of course, then I'm laughing because like I have a bunch of tasks like that, so then it takes an hour. But I try to squeeze them in. Like if I
How much you
know,
got done in that hour?
yeah. Like if I know, who was it? Someone who said something about natural deadlines. So like if I know I have to go pick my kid up, I'm like, well, I know I'm gonna have to stop doing this at 2. So I'll start at 1:30, and like that kind of helps. So that kind of time management stuff I like. It's tricky because people talk about procrastinating. And of course I procrastinate. We all do. I don't trust anyone who says they don't. Because even if I got it done like a week before it was due, I will still fiddle with it until it's all the way done. So, but I really adhere to Parkinson's law, which is that work expands to fill the time you give it. So on the one hand, you don't want to wait till the day before in case you really wind up with a snag. But if you give yourself a week to do something that really is only going to take you a day, you will take that whole week. So I try to balance those things. I try to kind of like keep an eye on what I'm spending too much time on. I will catch myself like, oh, Leah, you've been doing this for like 2 hours and you were just fiddling around. Like, oh my gosh, Canva. you you get lost in there, and that can be a real problem. So yeah, it's just, for me, it's about biting off manageable chunks and keeping track of the chunks. That's my soundbite. Keep track of the chunks. Because that's really what it is. And then of course you get I never realized that other people said this, but I'll be like, once this is done, I'll be a whole new person. I say that all the time. And then like the second I say it and the second I'm done with the thing, it's like, oh, here, by the way, here's a whole nother giant thing you've got to do. And it's like, oh my God, does it never end? Like, man.
But now you're a different person. Now you're the person that finished the other thing. So maybe you're the person
Yeah.
that finished this
Yeah,
thing.
maybe I am. I am a different person. Just not who I thought I was gonna be. I thought I was gonna be like relaxed by the edge of the pool. That was the person I wanted to be, not the person with a new project. But at the same time, and like this is not me trying to, I mean, we like to live lives of gratitude and things like that. But I do remind myself, like, not just this is what you signed up for, but how cool is this? That you get to do this, like I just remind myself of that. Cause, I mean, let's face it, it gets tedious when like my job is like, updating a blog and okay, that's great. I don't mind that. But how about this? Most of my job is literally waiting for pages to load. Like, if you can quantify how much time do we spend waiting for pages to load, and like we'd have a whole another day in our week. So I have and actually just last week I decided I'm going to keep a poetry book by my computer and read poems while I'm waiting for pages to load, because I'm like, I cannot just sit here and stare at the little circle.
Or you
So
need a faster internet connection. I don't know.
well, there's that too. No, there are two specific sites that I use, and like everything else is fine, but these two that I use the most are just awful. So anyway, that there, but you're right. I live out in the boonies, so that's possible. Um, yeah. So there's no great system. I wish I could say there was, but I just remind myself, like, what you're doing is really, really cool.
Mm.
And when I'm really, really, really feeling burnt out, because I'll journal, and I hate when I find myself journaling, this is what I got done, and this is what I have to do. And I'm like, I'll tell myself in my journal, like, well, where are you?
Mm.
Like, who cares what you got done? Like, who cares about your stupid bullet list? Like, where are you? So when I'm able to, one of the things I like to do, of course, I like to like watch an episode of Better Call Saul, or like paint my fingernails. They're like horribly in need of it right now. But I like to watch like a writing video, or just sit and like feed my writer's soul, because as much as I'm surrounded by writers and writing, I am not always doing a lot of writing, and I'm certainly not always pursuing the craft of writing. And so that's something I try to do, just to kind of remind myself, like, the reason you're doing all of these things is because you can sit in a writing class and produce something, or you can sit at the table and write an essay, So those are the things I try to remind myself of. I do better some days than others.
Yeah. What types of things feed your writer's soul? I love that. I love that phrase. What besides
It's
writing?
yeah. It's writing, it's the revision of writing, it's okay, like I like the writing part, or like once I get started, I do. I just really like it's who, like, I think Dorothy Parker is attributed with saying, like, I hate writing, I love having written. One of my favorite things is like when I close the computer after I have written. Like, when I don't know running, I'm not a runner, I never have been, but like the runner's high, like, does that go on during the running or afterwards? I don't really
Mm.
know. But anyway, I just like, I get a rider's high. Like, okay, I feel good, and I feel like I can rest. I feel like I'm not all just wound up. Like, I just released something and it feels really good. And it's amazing how we forget that. We forget that feeling, and so then we forget to chase the feeling, or we don't chase it. But the other thing I really like to do is watch any one of the several dozen writing class videos that I have. Like, I buy them and I collect them. Like, I get Jane Friedman's newsletter, and I'm like, oh, this class looks great, 25 bucks, heck yeah. And I buy it, and then I never watch it. This is my secret, guy. Just collect the material and let it sit on your shelf. Um, so so yeah, when I can say, like, no, you're gonna sit down and you're gonna just watch the video.
Mm.
Because this is, some people are just like, oh, just play it while you're cooking dinner. I'm like, no, because this is the kind of person I am. I have to sit there and like write notes fastidiously, like it's an event. Okay. So, but I'm like, okay, but that's an hour. Why can't I give myself that hour? So this is the balance, of course, I think we're all trying to achieve. And I have asked myself, like, don't you think you deserve this? It's not enough to just surround yourself in writing type activities like, oh, I'm planning a summer conference. That's not writing. That's a bunch of emails to writers. Like, don't fool yourself. Like, it's back to those concentric circles. I feel like if I can just be writing adjacent, like it'll rub off on me, and it does not. You really you have got to put yourself in that place, in that seat. No matter how close you are to whatever you're trying to produce, if you're not actually producing it, you're not feeding yourself.
Of that not being writing adjacent. I think we all do that. That's what we tell ourselves. We tell ourselves, well, I'm doing the classes, I'm doing the reading, I'm reading about writing, I'm hanging out with writers. But if we're not writing, we're not
Now,
writing.
I will say though, I think the taking the classes and the reading about writing is like as close as you can get. Like that's like skin on skin contact.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that
It's like
weird?
third base.
Oh my God, so sorry. Yeah. You can't
But
have
if
a
you
conversation.
don't come home and do the writing, right, it's
Yeah.
still, you didn't go all the way.
Yeah. No, that's
You're not
exactly
meta.
right. Oh my gosh. Only I could. I always, anytime you put me anywhere, I'm going to say something weird like that and then be like, ooh.
I brought you.
So yeah, I mean that's about as close as you can get, because the idea is if you're reading the right ones. I mean, haven't you read those books on craft where you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to put this down right now and write. Um, Beth Kephart can do that to me. In fact, all my books are out of order because I just moved, but her book, Handling the Truth, got me so stirred up that I just opened to the back cover and started writing because I was like,
Yeah.
no time, you can't look for paper. And eventually I met her like just on Facebook, and I took some classes with her, and I got to show her like, look what you did to me. And it was really cute. It was really sweet. But so yeah, if you're reading a book like that and it's making you feel inspired, like that's pretty good. That feeds my writer's soul. And taking the class, that will feed my writer's soul. But other than that, what are you really doing? Although, as I'm saying this, you and I, we met 2018, whatever, and we wrote a lot back and forth during COVID. And didn't we talk about, and we also did the artist way together. And she talked about the artist dates and how you just have to feed yourself creatively. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be writing. And I think that that's something that I also kind of will cling to, is like, okay, I didn't do the writing, but I went to a museum, I went to a little art gallery. So those are a little bit of a step away, but when you see other people creating, it rubs off on you. I think when you surround yourself with people who are doing similar things, I think that makes a big difference. Or maybe not even doing similar things, but have a similar approach, a similar ambition for themselves. Um, I think you know what I mean. Just
Or passion, just passion for anything.
yes,
They have
thank you, thank you. It's like ambition wasn't quite the right, but they're putting themselves into whatever it is as much as you're putting yourself into whatever you have, and you're like, hey man, you can go on with your chemistry. That's cool. I admire what you're doing. I'm going to do the same thing over here. But like, you're still, running parallel. Because I do have a friend who's in biology, and she's really into it and nerds out, and I'm like, sweet, I got linguistics and I'm going to nerd out, and we're really good friends and we get along, and I feel like we can completely see eye to eye on things and inspire each other with our work because we're putting in the work. So no matter, always, you got to be putting in the work.
Yeah, I loved what you said earlier about putting your money where your mouth is when you were, editing and, looking at all these other writers, and eventually you just had to tell yourself, to put your money where your mouth is. And you're kind of saying the same thing with being writing adjacent versus writing. What is it? So you have to do the thing, right? But what does it take, like in your head? What do you have to finally just tell yourself to put your money where your mouth is, or not stop being writer adjacent and be writing? Like what is the thing you have to tell yourself?
Um, a couple of things. One, or a couple different, there's a couple of different ways that I do it. One is I'm signed up for a writers group that we actually you have to pay for. So like,
Mm.
like money's involved. And really great feedback from a novelist who's like written many and won awards. So another like I want to impress her. So like there's a couple of things that are motivating me, and that stuff is due on the 24th. So you're not going to miss that because you paid for it and you don't want to let this person down. So that's a big one right there. Just
Mm.
straight up. If you have to pay for a deadline, if that's where you are in your life, just do it.
Mm.
There's no shame. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there is shame. Maybe someone else is like, well, you should be able to do it yourself. I'm like, well, guess what? I do a lot of things and this is not working for me because let's face it, sometimes we aren't good at doing things for ourselves. You
Mm.
know, so I struggle with memoir books or books on craft where they're like, you just have to write, you have to spend all this time, you have to abandon everything else. I'm like, I don't know that I can do that all the time because when I'm not doing my work, I've got kids screaming all. So, anyway, so you do the deadline, it's going to push you further than you thought you would, or that you might have gone on your own. You do this, where you kind of create the writing sessions,
Mm.
right? And you're like, hey, come write with me, blah, blah, blah. And I think that that creates some accountability. It's just kind of you have to show up, especially if you're the one putting it together, because you definitely have to show up. Though I was actually thinking about doing that in my creative nonfiction group. Like, all right, guys, let's just do like 20-minute Pomodoros,
Mhm.
Um, and then the other one is I kind of just sneak it on myself. I will play tricks on myself because there's more than one of me in here, and they don't always know what the other one's doing. Um, okay, I just stopped myself from saying something really weird, so you're welcome. Anyway,
Oh, now I want to know.
no,
Okay.
I'm laughing about it now. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, but I will trick myself because I will get out my journal and just start writing about what I'm writing.
Mm.
And that will get me to generate words or generate a new perspective on it and make me go, okay, now I want to get over there and do it. So I trick myself by doing that. The other one is if I do this thing like, okay, at 10 o'clock, you're going to start writing. I psych myself out like, nope, I got to go and do anything else. Like, how this goes. But if I'm just like sitting at the computer and I'm like, oh, hello, word. like like I'm not looking, but my fingers are on the keyboard and like I just write like one line. All you have to do is write that one line and then you're good. You're going. And if the worst case scenario is you only wrote that one line and then you were like, no, seriously, I'm writing one line. Well, then you wrote that one line. So those are the ways I kind of trick myself. It's kind of like working out. Like some people really get into the habit of it and do a really good job with it. Other people are like, yes, I'm going to do that starting tomorrow.
Mm.
I have so many ambitions, guys, all the time. I'm like, you should write in the morning for 20 minutes. Every morning you should write because then you'll feel better your whole day. But do we do things that are good for us? No. You see the Doritos and everything, just, you have them for breakfast.
So cozy.
Yeah. So, it's just this constant fight and it's amazing. I don't know why we do this to ourselves. I don't understand it.
Sabotage.
Sometimes I do better than others. I mean, I feel like with this one, I had the deadline of Fantasticon and I needed it. In fact, I had talked to you because you had self-published. I was like, how much time do I need for shipping to get it there? And you told me something. I was like, okay, so February 9th, I got to have this done. And I did it. You know what I mean? So sometimes you just have to set yourself those kind of deadlines. My problem is if I'm just setting myself like a fake deadline, like you have to have this done by the 18th. I'm like, well, who says? On whose authority? And you don't listen to yourself. Like, how am I not an authority in my own life? And yet.
That's
So
so
that's like the number one is I do get some writing done. I like my number one has been I write about writing and then I mark that page like with a post-it so that later when I'm going back and I'm like, when did I do that? And I knew it was really good. Well, then I have it. I write put a little post-it note on it or just dog ear the page. That's I mean, for me, when I'm writing, I like to type on the keyboard. That just helps me. I do it faster, yada, yada. When I'm journaling, I do it by hand. But I know many people, right, who even when they're doing their novels, they write it longhand. That's fairly common? I feel like that's kind of what I'm doing
I
is
I just interviewed someone who said they write their entire first draft longhand.
yes. And so like I have to like to me, writing longhand is journal. So it's like hard for me to like look at that like that's not really the kind
Mhm.
of writing you're doing. But that's where it's tricking me, especially because I'm in my journal and I'm really in a like a not not the buzzword, but like I'm in a safe place. That's a safe space
Mhm.
for me and I'm comfortable and I'm relaxed. I've done it for 30 years. This is my best friend. And
Mhm.
so it's kind of a trick for me there. And then another one I like to do, and I used to tell my students to do this, especially with writer's block or what have you. And it's the same idea is I will write it in an email because I write emails all day long. And so it's all these little mind tricks that I'll play on myself. And then it's like, you know what? I wrote a paragraph here. I've got a paragraph here. Now I've got half a page. And once you get half a page, you got something to work with. um, um,
I love that it's all basically tricking yourself into writing.
just thinking about like these silly ways we like trick. Okay, like that trick you do when you hold up a blanket and then you're like and you drop it and you disappear and your dog's like, whoa, that's how I feel with me. I'm like, whoa, look what I did. And it's like, dude, I can't, I trick myself.
I love the mental image I got when of like Word being open on your computer and you just being like, hello, like fancy meeting you here. What you doing?
All these tabs open and I've got like one Word document and then I'm like, oh, you're new around here.
Come here often.
Yes. And like I will even if I will like put little prompts on there. Like I know I want to write about this memory, so I know I need to hit this point and this point and this point. And so I'll like, okay, here's a paragraph about that. Here's one about that. Because what intimidates me is like, oh, you have to write this whole huge scene and incorporate all of the people and everything that was said and all of the feelings that you had and how it resounded with you for the next 30 years. And that is intimidating. Whereas if you just say, hey, what happened when, you set the hairbrush
Oh, oh no.
like that? And I think prompts actually help a little bit too. Did
Yeah.
it cut out there?
Kind of cut out, but I got
Sure.
to.
It was golden years, that was the best, smartest thing I've ever said.
No,
Um,
no, no. It's intimidating to write the whole thing, but when all you're focusing on is what happened when you set the hairbrush
yeah,
down.
you just give yourself like, here's what happened in the hallway, write about this, or like here, write about the garden, write about this character in the scene. If you just give yourself these little mini prompts to kind of break it down, and then it's like you can either connect them or then you can kind of switch them around and see how you want to fit them together. And that can be a good practice too. So
Mhm.
that
Yeah,
works.
all that. I don't even have to ask what are your tools for fighting writer's block question because that was
My
there.
whole life. And it's not writer's block, it's writer's evasion.
Mhm.
like, like, I really think that. Like, yes,
Oh,
sometimes sometimes I have like, okay, I really can't think of anything. But I'm like, no, I have like 4 book ideas. So who am I really kidding?
writer's evasion. I've
Mm,
been writing stuff down because I like to try to title the episodes like based on like a quote or something. And I have like 6 different options now.
Professional writing evader. Like that one works.
I like it. All right. Well, we will kind of come to the end here. We've gotten so much good advice so far, but I'll give you 2 choices here. I started this last time. Since you've already given such good advice, I'll leave the option to give one more piece of advice if a writer came up to you and was like, I need help. Like, what is the one piece of advice you would give? Or what is the best piece of writing advice you've ever been given?
Okay, I'm gonna answer both. One, quickly, is advice I gave myself that I wish I had heard in retrospect, which was simply take yourself seriously. You
Mm.
know, if you're afraid to say you're a writer, you're afraid to think that your work matters, take yourself seriously because this is stealing a quote from someone else, but she said, "You never know who's out there waiting for your words." And
Mm.
that really stopped me. And then the best writing advice I ever got was actually about a paper about a Wallace Stevens poem that I was racking my brains over. And my professor just said, "You think through writing, go, be bold." And those words, "be bold," I
Mm.
have on my wall, because sometimes, you're afraid to come up with something. You're afraid to write that thing down, or you think you can't do it. And even professionally, I had to, one time someone asked me about a job referral, and I was like, well, how about I do it? And I'd never put myself out there before, but I thought to myself, be bold. And that has gotten me, I think, pretty far. I try not to mistake that for be belligerent, but but
Fine.
bold, be bold.
Well, I love that. And that is the great place to end. But before we do, where can folks find you? Where can they find your work, if they want to read and learn more about you?
Yes, I have a very unspellable
We'll put links below too. So if you don't have to spell it, just
okay.
let us know. We'll put it below.
I kind of have like ye old dusty website that I think a lot of writers have. Maybe I shouldn't speak for everyone, but that's Leah Lederman at wordpress.com. And then I'm pretty active on Facebook. But I am on Instagram just with pictures and pithy sayings. And then Twitter, I don't know, I'm horrible at that. But you will just find me working around. And honestly, if you reach out to like the Midwest Writers Workshop, you can find me there. That's where I like work. So that would be a good place. That's midwestwriters@yahoo.com. If you have questions or want to run something by me. And my books, they're all on Amazon. Just get them there.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing all your wonderful wisdom.
No, thank you. This was fun to get to talk this
All
stuff.
right. And thank you for giving everyone different ways that they can fight for their creativity. Have a wonderful day.
Very good. Bye, guys.